Hey, and welcome to Unit 8, Day 3 notes. Today we're going to start off by reviewing factoring by grouping. So remember, first step for factoring by grouping is making sure that it's in standard form. Once we've verified that it's in standard form, we are going to group my two largest and two smallest terms together using parentheses. Now we're going to take the GCF from each group. If you need to make the chart for each group, you're more than welcome. The GCF for my first group is going to be 3k squared, and that's going to leave me with k minus 3. And then my GCF from the second group is going to be 2, and that leaves me with k minus 3. Now we're going to take the GCF from the entire line. So both terms share k minus 3. Remember that my funny GCF is always going to be a binomial. So I factor out k minus 3, and I'm left with 3k squared plus 2. And that's my final answer. Moving on to number 2. First, we're going to verify that it's in standard form from highest exponent to lowest exponent. And then we're going to group my terms together. The first two and the second two. Feel free to group them within the original problem as long as you have a plus sign between your two groups, like is shown here. Now we're going to take the GCF of my first group, which is 2b squared. And that leaves me with 3b minus 2. And then the GCF of my second group, which is 5. And that leaves me with 3b minus 2. Now we'll find my funny GCF, which is the binomial GCF, which is 3b minus 2. And that leaves me with 2b squared plus 5. Pause the video here and try number 3 and 4 on your own. Here are the answers for number 3 and number 4. Make sure that when you are doing number 3, after you take the GCF of the first group, you have to look for the GCF of the second group. The second group does not have a GCF per se. There's nothing that you can divide out that will change my group. So in that case, my GCF is 1. When we're doing factoring, you would want to put the 1 out front so that after you take your funny GCF of n plus 2, you remember to write 5n squared plus 1 as your remaining answer. Nothing crazy on number 4. Take a second to check your answers, and then we're going to go on to factoring. Now we're going to factor by busting the b. So we are going to take our trinomial that is going to be given to us and turn it into a 4-term polynomial. The first thing that we should always do is check for a GCF. Next, we're going to multiply a by c, and then find the two factors of a times c that add to bb. We can always use a table. Next, we're going to bust the p into two terms that you found. And then we'll finish by factoring by grouping. You may be wondering, what is a, b, and c? Well, in a trinomial, how a trinomial is set up is ax squared plus bx plus c, where a, b, and c are my coefficients, or c in this case is my constant. So moving on to number 1, We're first going to identify my A value, B value, and C value. My A value is 1. My B value is 12. And my C value is 35. The next step that we have to do is multiply A and C together. When I multiply A and C, I get 35. And I need to find all my factors of 35. So here we will pull up our calculator. And go to our table and do 35 divided by x. Start at 1, step by 1, and make sure it's on auto. So my first factor is 1 and 35. 2 doesn't work because it comes out to a decimal. Same for 3, 4, and 5 goes with 7. We scroll down. 6 goes with a decimal, and then 7 goes back with 5, so we know that we can stop there. We need to find a factor pair, like 1 and 35 or 5 and 7. We need to find the pair that adds to be 12. So I'm going to extend my table a little bit and put 12 on the right-hand side. So I want to add my factor pairs together to see what I get. 1 and 35 gives me 36. 5 and 7 adds to be 12. So this will be the factor pairs that I use to bust the bee. When I say bust the bee, that means that we're going to take my b value of 12 and split it up into 2 terms. So instead of 12, I'm going to have 5 and 7. You'll notice that if I simplify my 4-term polynomial, which is right here, it will simplify right back down to x squared plus 12x plus 35. So I've changed nothing mathematically here. Now I'm going to follow all the steps of factoring by grouping. We'll group them together, take a GCF of both groups, find my binomial GCF, and I'm left with x plus 7. So the only new step for busting the bee is finding those 2 numbers so that I can make it a 4-term polynomial. Moving on to number 2. My A value here is 1, my B value is -10, and my C value is 25. I'm going to make my table again on the right-hand side with A times C on the left and B on the right. A times C here is 25, and B is -10. Now I'll list all my factors of 25. Go back to my table, do 25 divided by x, press enter, start at 1. So we have 1 and 25. And my last pair is 5 and 5. If I add these together, I get 26 and 10, neither of which match -10, which is my B value. But there is one thing that we can change. Remember, factor pairs are 2 numbers that multiply together to be my number 25 in this case. So 1 times 25 is 25, 5 times 5 is 25. We know that a positive times a positive is a positive, but there are 2 other types of numbers that can be multiplied together. We can have a positive and a negative, and a negative and a negative. So if we have a positive and a negative multiplied together, that will give me a negative number, which 25 is not negative in this case, so we can't try that option. My last option is to multiply 2 negatives together. So if I change negative 1 to negative 1 and 25 to negative 25, that'll still multiply to be positive 25, but add to be negative 26. Same thing with 5 and 5. We'll change them both to negatives. Negative 5 times negative 5 is still positive 25, but when they add together, they add to be negative 10. And that satisfies my criteria. So for this problem, negative 10 is going to be busted into my two new terms, negative 5v and negative 5v plus 25. Now we're going to group the terms together. Remember that one of the rules when we're grouping is that we have to have a plus sign in the middle of my two groups. So my first group is going to be v squared minus 5v. Then I will put a plus sign in the middle. My second group will lead off with negative 5v plus 25. Now I will take a GCF from both groups. My first GCF is v. It leaves me with v minus 5. My second GCF is negative 5, which leaves me with v minus 5. Now I will take my funny GCF, or my binomial GCF, and it's v minus 5. And that again leaves me with another v minus 5. And the final answer in simplified form is v minus 5 squared. Moving on to number 3. Notice that number 3 has an a value that is not 1. When we see that, we want to make sure that we are checking for a GCF. So my a value is negative 5, b is negative 80, and c is negative 315. By looking at all three of these, we know that each one is factorable by 5. So I'm going to factor out a negative 5 from my entire equation, and that leaves me with k squared. We'll take negative 80 divided by 5. That gives me 16. And then negative 315 divided by negative 5. That gives me positive 63. Now I will bust the b using my trinomial within the parentheses. So now my a, b, and c value will come from here. A is 1, b is 16, and c is 63. You'll create your chart, a times c on the left and b on the right. Now we will find all of my factor pairs of 63. We'll take 63 divided by x, start at 1 in my table. So we have 1 and 63, 3 and 21, 7 and 9. 8 is not a factor, and then when we get to 9, that is a repeat, so we know we can stop. Now I'm going to add each line together to see if I get a sum of 16. 1 and 63 gives me 64. 3 and 21 gives me 24. 7 and 9 gives me 16. Now we will bust my b into the two terms. And then factor by grouping. Pause the video here and complete your problem with factoring by grouping. Here is your final answer. Take a moment to check your work. Notes will continue in part 2.